Welcome to the Social Blueprint, and it's the Everybody Has a Story series. Today we've got a really, really important interview which I've been looking forward to so much. But before we delve into the interview, I just want to remind everyone to go to our website, which is socialblueprint.org.au, if you wanted to listen to this again or you wanted to go into our back catalogue because we've got so many interviews there. You'll also be able to learn about events in the community and everything else that's going on. We are so proud today to be talking to a woman of wisdom, courage, tenacity, compassion, and with so many lessons to share. It's such an important story here. And we're talking to Tammy Casselson today, who's just released a very important and very helpful book called The Grimmest of Fairy Tales. There it is. I read this in 2 short afternoons, and you can see so many quotes and points here that I want to talk about. I don't know that we're going to get through it all, but there's just so much good information here. But first of all, congratulations on releasing the book. I can't even imagine how hard it would have been. It's so raw, it's so real, it's so honest. Anyway, I hope you're feeling good. It's out there.
Thank you, I am.
And we can talk about what's in here and more. First of all, one of the things I wanted to talk about was this. So this is something new for us, everybody. This is our icebreaker wheel. And in fact, there's lots of fun stuff on there. So I'm going to ask Tammy to spin the wheel and let's see what comes up. And we're going to start with something a bit silly and fun. Okay, so if you want to spin the wheel, see what comes up. Celebrity crush.
Celebrity crush.
Yeah.
I'm not sure who my current celebrity crush is. It's generally been Rob Lowe, I suppose. Yeah.
Young old Rob Lowe or old Rob Lowe, older Rob Lowe.
He's been a pretty consistent, you know.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, we know what to get you for your birthday. We'll get a poster. All right. Well, we won't go into it anymore. We'll just leave it right there. You can all look up Rob Lowe if you don't know who he is. I want to talk a bit more about you now. And the first thing I wanted to ask about is trauma-informed meditation. Now, I know a lot of people have heard about meditation, mindfulness meditation. It's very popular. But trauma-informed meditation, how's it different? And why did you become interested in it?
So trauma-informed meditation is a component of mindfulness and meditation. I've been interested in meditation and mindfulness for a very long time, but it gives people a space that is safe. And so it's very interested in giving people choice and agency. So when we do meditation, we will give people the choice whether to close down their eyes or not to close down their eyes. We also will take into account the fact that some people have gone through trauma, whether it's little traumas or big traumas in their lives. And so often meditation is about really going inward, and sometimes that can be triggering. And so we might give alternatives like just being in the room rather than really noticing those spaces. So we're always giving the person agency, making them feel safe, giving them those choices in the room, and really always coming back to feeling calm and being in charge of your own body.
That makes a lot of sense. I think giving people that ability to make the choice themselves and to have the control in the situation. Yeah. Because I'd imagine that with whatever trauma they've gone through, that wasn't present. Yeah. No, that's really helpful to know. And can people learn this online? Do they go to a course? Where would you learn this or be a part of this?
I think that there are so many people that are offering mindfulness and meditation today. And it's important to try out different things and see what works for you. Being careful about who you trial meditation with. So, for example, there are amazing apps out there. I do mindfulness meditation on Insight Timer. I've got some of my stuff out on Insight Timer, and a lot of my teachers are on Insight Timer. Just being careful, because some of the classes that are out there are not trauma informed. So I think that just testing things out, going slowly, and really just seeing that it works for you. Sometimes it is uncomfortable in the beginning, and just looking for a meditation teacher that works for you. Just testing and seeing what works and what doesn't.
No, it's really interesting for people to be so sensitive to those needs and not call them out that you're not doing it right or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what meditation is about, is not being judgmental.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. We've learnt something new already. We're going to learn more. The book is called The Grimmest of Fairy Tales, and I have to say it's actually the perfect title. When I thought of this, you think of, Grimm's fairy tales, you think of rainbows and sunshine and happy things that happen in the future to people and, happy lives. And then, the way you flip this around also, just suggesting someone's going down the yellow brick road and they've taken a wrong turn and maybe they didn't see the turn that they'd taken and things didn't go to plan and they find themselves somewhere completely different.
That's exactly what it felt like.
Well, let's hear your story. On that note, let's hear it. What actually happened? When did it start, and what happened?
I mean, that's exactly, life was pretty the same as everybody else's, very average middle class background, great education. And I think that's why I really wanted to share the story, is to say that it can happen to anyone. And I grew up in South Africa. I met someone who seemed really genuinely gorgeous and charming and lovely. And, I always wanted to get married and have children. And I studied hard and I worked hard. And that's how things seem to be. And then the little cracks seem to appear. But everybody has, bad days and good days in their relationship. Yeah. And then things didn't go so well, and we had a really bad time. In 2011, our relationship really took a bad turn, and this charming man turned into a very uncharming man and became quite mean. And I knew that our relationship wasn't okay, and that's when our relationship really fell apart. But I still didn't understand, I didn't have the awareness and the words to put to it. I would never have called it abuse, because I didn't know what coercive control was. I didn't know what emotional abuse. We didn't really use these words in those days. No. And then I just knew that he was saying things he shouldn't be saying, acting in ways he shouldn't be acting, and threatening things he shouldn't be threatening. And in 2016, everything really did fall apart. And he attempted to take his life. And I came home that day. I found him and got him to hospital in time. The ambulance came and took him to hospital. And when I came home, I, for the first time, started going through the things next to his bed, because I had no idea what was going on. And I found envelopes, opened and unopened, where there were just debt after debt. I found a huge bag of cards that I had never seen, credit cards, like from huge amounts of banks. I found 5 different postal addresses. I found...
What a shock. What
a huge amount of things.
I mean, there's the shock, like you were talking about, when things started to go not to plan, things not going right. I guess we're taught to give people the benefit of the doubt, to see good in others, and optimistically, be committed, things will get better, work on it, and it just wasn't happening. And then you end up in that situation, and the shock of seeing your husband, and then all the rest of that. I mean, we can't even imagine what that must have felt like for you.
It was just total betrayal. Yeah,
Yeah.
total betrayal.
Yeah. I think one of the things you just said before is we don't always have the words. And it's so interesting how words have power. I've often thought, can you think the thought if you don't have the word to describe the thought? Which is where I think you were alluding to. There were terms that you were unaware of. And I think many people aren't aware of today that I really want us to talk about, to help others, to give them the power of words to identify things and communicate them. You've mentioned in there coercive control. I think a lot of people don't really understand what that is. Can you explain to us what that is and some examples of what that is?
Yeah, it's when someone is making you feel so fearful and pushing you to do things that you wouldn't otherwise do. It's a form of abuse where it's not necessarily physical abuse. And we know that most abuse starts with coercive control. And we know that in the past, we didn't give attention to coercive control. It's really difficult. You go into a police station and you try and explain what's going on. And I've multiple times gone into police stations where people just don't understand, whether it's police or lawyers, doctors, friends. It's so hard to explain, but there's so much fear just in threats. When someone punches you, but they don't punch you all the way to a punch, they punch you to inches of your face, or they threaten you that something's going to happen to you or your children, or they threaten that they're going to take their own lives. So those threats totally control everything that you do. And there's just complete fear all the time.
Yeah. It sounds like it's a repeated and consistent behaviour. Is that what?
And I think that's that is the thing that I've missed out of the definition. Is it's not just a one-off behaviour.
Yeah.
It is a pattern of behaviour.
It almost sounds like with these behaviours, they have created like a prison, like a cage. Would that be how it felt?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and when this happens so slowly over time, it's a bit like the analogy of, I guess, the frog in the boiling water. I'm sure it's very hard to pick up. Little things start to build on each other, and becomes your new normal. Is that how it was for a while?
Totally, and that's why you don't see it.
Yeah.
Also, I think what's really important to explain is that it's not only negative behavior. It's a little bit of good, lots of horrible. A little bit of good, lots of horrible. So there's punishing behavior, then nice behavior. Punishing behavior, then nice behavior. So there's also this confusion of, am I imagining this? Is this happening? So there's a promise of a holiday, then the holiday disappears. Then there's buying something nice for you, a gift, and then there's some punishment. And it's so confusing. And that's why you're always unsure of where you stand. But there's also, that's why we talk about gaslighting, which is that, am I making this up? And also they're telling you you're imagining things.
Yes.
And that's why there's this total confusion of what's going on. And people around you are often seeing this person as a charming, wonderful person and telling you how wonderful they are. And you're so lucky to be married to this person.
Yes.
So it is very confusing.
Yes.
Often you're reaching out to your best friend, a parent, and asking them what they think. And they're saying, give them a chance, or, they must be having a bad day, or it's okay. Yeah. And it's just confusing. Yes. And so for me, the first time I realized it was abuse was only when I was outside of the relationship. And so it had built up really, really slowly over many, many years. Yes. I also met him when I was 15. So I knew nothing.
Yeah, romantic, stars in your eyes.
Oh,
what do you
completely.
know? Yeah, fair enough.
And he was very charming, and he did, he really admired me, and he, you know, he thought that I was wonderful at some stage and told me how wonderful I was, but then he would break me down the next day. So my self-esteem was up and down.
Yes.
From him.
Yes. You know, there's actually a song out at the moment, and in the song, it's a woman singing the song, and she sings about, I can be this and I can be that, but then I'm to this, and then I can be that, but then I'm to that. I can be 1,000 different me's, and none of them are good enough. Did it feel like that at some stage too? Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, I loved to cook, and I would get in the kitchen and I would, you know, bake or whatever, but I would make a mess, and then I would be in trouble for making a mess, and so I stopped cooking, you know, or
it was ongoing. It sounds like.
Yeah.
You know, there's actually a really a story in the book here which really brought it home what you're saying. How you had a friend who was in a hospital with cancer, and you and a number of your female friends were visiting her and, you know, supporting her through that. And the other husbands were supporting their wives when they came home. But yours was doing the opposite, was telling you how you'd abandoned him and you were dead to him. And I can't even imagine what that would have felt like for you.
That was when I knew our relationship was over.
Yeah.
That was when I knew. And he told my children that I've abandoned them because, you know, we were sitting by her bedside. She was going, and we were losing her, and it was just so soul destroying that he couldn't support me.
Yeah.
You know,
in your time of need at that point. Yeah. Yeah. And I would imagine also seeing how the other wives are supported by their husbands also added to the questions you've been having about, is this normal?
Yeah.
No, I think that was such a powerful point in your story here that I think so many people can relate to, where you're supporting others and then you come home and you're not supported yourself, and add that to everything else and this psychological cage that you find yourself in. Look, I think it's a really important thing to you know, be aware of that. And I think one of my questions here is, and actually you mentioned villains don't always look like villains. And the fact that people were saying, you know, seeing the good things, I guess. And, you know, there's some statistics you mentioned which I thought were actually horrifying, and I want to just read them out now. 1 in 5 Australian adults have experienced violence, emotional abuse, or economic abuse by a partner. 1 in 5. For women, the statistics are 1 in 4 have experienced something. And only 47% of people think that they have a problem in their community. These don't add up. These don't add up. You know, 1 in 4 women, if you think about the friends you have, you know, there's a chance that there's going to be one or more of them that are in a situation as you describe, or a little bit different, but still an abusive situation. But we don't think it happens in our communities. You know, you've got a beautiful quote in there where you talk about, you know, we see what we want to see. We don't see things that are really there despite the evidence. Is that how it felt for you?
I think that, you know, that last one, that 47%, that people believe that, you know, 47% of people believe that it happens in their communities. I think that's such an interesting one. And so people believe that abuse happens in 91% of cases, but that only in 47% of cases in their community. And I just think that that's mind-blowing, that we don't believe it happens in our neighbours' houses. And that's really what I found. And, you know, I talk to so many survivors now and people who are going through abuse. And so many people are not believed. And that was what I couldn't believe, is how many people didn't believe it. And I think part of that is that they are so charming, and obviously they're charming. Like, we wouldn't marry them, we wouldn't date them if they weren't gorgeous and charming. Like, who would marry a monster?
Yes.
But, you know, these are your friends, your family, and you're telling them these terrible things, and often they can't believe it. And I understand they can't believe it because it is just so horrifying. But why would you make it up? You know,
You've got nothing to gain.
it's so horrible.
Yeah.
And, you know, for a long time, I really believed we were going to be killed, that I was going to be the next person to be killed, or my children were going to be killed. And people just couldn't take that in. You know, I was sobbing at friends or at police stations. And it's, you know, to hear people's stories where they haven't been believed, you know, so many beautiful advocates I talk to and victims who, it's that secondary victimization is so much even more traumatizing than the abuse itself. So I really, my biggest thing that I talk about is how important it is to acknowledge people's pain that they're going through.
Yeah.
Because those people who did reach out and who did, you know, those doctors who listen, or, you know, counselors who listened, or, you know, just hold you in a safe place, friends who did reach out, and strangers in some cases, it just makes such a difference.
Yes. There's a term that you use in the book that I'd never heard before, and since I read your book, I've actually been talking to everyone around me about it. And it's a term called flying monkeys. Now, where did this come from? Because I actually thought it was really important for us to talk about it, and also for us to question ourselves: are we being a flying monkey, or people we know we don't realise? So, what is a flying monkey?
Yeah. So one of the things, I mean, I'm an educator, so one of the things, and I love learning. So one of the things is that I really spent a lot of time learning and reading around things like abuse and narcissism. So my ex was diagnosed as narcissistic personality disorder. And that after he attempted suicide, he was in an institute for a while, and a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a social worker, they all spoke to me around these things. But I did read a lot about narcissism and flying monkeys. And so I didn't make up the term. It is a real term that exists, but I love the term. And there were a lot of flying monkeys. So, for example, I was in court with him, in and out of court. So the post-separation abuse is worse than the abuse. We know that often abuse escalates when someone leaves an abuse situation. And for me, that was definitely the case. And we know that the threat to victims increases when people leave a situation. And when I was in court, a friend of my ex's came to court and spoke up for my ex, said that something my daughter had done was coerced by me, and was, you know, he spoke up for my ex and said all these terrible things, but barely knew me, barely knew my daughter, didn't know much of the situation other than my ex's story. And so that's being a flying monkey, you know, to speak up for someone. And here I was, you know, we were trying to get an intervention order to keep my daughter safe. Really, that's being a flying monkey, you know. But there's small cases of being a flying monkey. I told a friend that, and I really did protect my ex for a long time, because I wanted the community to look after him. He wasn't well. And so that I was in this dilemma of wanting him to be looked after, but also obviously keeping my children safe and away from him. And I told a friend that I had an intervention order against him because I was keeping my children safe. And she said, I don't believe in the courts. Instead of, you know, asking me questions, or, you know, so, you know, that's being a flying monkey.
Yeah. It's it seems to be enabling behaviour, enabling it to continue on without stepping in or asking the awkward questions of the the perpetrator, but equally not supporting the person who's actually been on the other end of it. And I guess you thought a lot about why people fall into that position. And you do have a beautiful quote in here, that one about people see what they want to see, or they see what they expect to see, that kind of selective perception, confirmation bias. I think it's also just a really hard thing for people to get their heads around. Like you say, that it can happen to people who are living lives supposedly like yours.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's very hard for people to think that it could happen to anyone, which means
Yes.
it could happen to them.
Yeah.
And also, talking about financial abuse means that often people are in a similar situation to me. I didn't have access to money, um, which makes you feel very stupid, makes you feel very shameful. But actually, the shame should be on
Yeah.
the perpetrator.
Yes.
But when I talk to a lot of people, it's mostly women, but there are men as well. They're in the same situation.
Yeah.
I say to them, do you have access? And sometimes women do have access, but then they also don't have any idea of what's going on in the financial situation in their home. They don't go to the insurance broker with their husband. And that thought makes them feel a little bit vulnerable. And so one of the things that I really push is that we need transparency in a relationship. It's really important that should be a core value in a relationship. And that's not something I was taught growing up. That's not something, I was taught trust and honesty and love and all these things. And I grew up in a relationship where I believed I was doing my part in the partner. I wanted an equal partnership, which is what I believed I had. I was doing my part of the partnership. He was doing his part of the partnership. I actually am very capable when it comes to, being able to deal with money and, being able to, I've got a commerce degree behind
I was going to say, you've got a commerce degree. You're more qualified than most.
But I don't enjoy playing in that area.
Yeah.
So if I've got a partner who says, I'll play in that area, let me do the
Yes.
filing and the banking, I'm like, fabulous. You do that.
Yes.
And so if he's happy to do that and I'm happy to look after the children and, do my part, well, isn't that a partnership? We share things. But the truth is there should be clear transparency. And when I did start asking for access to the banking and why is it that you only give me a little bit of money in my account, and starting to ask it, that's when the threat started escalating and things started getting out of control. And that was only very close to when things really exploded.
Well, I wanted to ask you the difference between financial abuse and economic abuse, because I think the situation you've described, the not knowing, particularly I think in a female-male relationship where you've got the woman who's focusing on, family and home and career, and the partner saying, oh, look, I'll handle that. And obviously there needs to be trust, but like you say, transparency. And like you've also said, there needs to be interest, even though it may not be that interesting to some. Like there needs to be interest to actually learn more, because you work hard, you've earned money, you've worked hard, it's your money as well, you're in a long-term committed relationship. So I think, what is the difference between them?
So we mostly use them interchangeably. So I talk about economic abuse or financial abuse interchangeably, but they are two different terms. Economic abuse is the bigger term. So economic abuse is about, everything around, everything that is around, transportation, getting jobs, everything that we do to do with economics. But financial abuse is around controlling bank accounts, giving you only an amount that you can have as a small amount to spend, sabotaging your ability to earn money, taking doing things like fraud with the loan accounts and mortgage and things like that.
Right. So in other words, again, it's another one of these cages that you're in, and you're fed a crumb occasionally, like a pocket money or a stipend.
And it doesn't end at the marriage ending. It continues after the marriage ending. So, opening accounts in your name. I had multiple accounts in my name.
That you didn't know about,
multiple mortgages, child support, so withholding child support, putting tax into you, getting you to pay their taxes. Child support, is a huge, big area that we're trying to sort out. There's just so many ways that.
Okay. In your book, you've actually got a lot of really, really helpful resources in there. And one of them, talking about financial abuse, is I think an organisation you're involved with, the Centre for Women's Economic Safety. What do they do? How can they help?
Yeah, so they're an amazing organisation. I do a lot of work with Rebecca Glenn from the centre, and they do a few different things. They run money clinics where you can go in and have a one-on-one with someone who will help you with things like bank accounts and loans and things like that. They build awareness around economic abuse. They have a website which you can get a lot of information around.
I wanted to just go back to for a second is we talked about being in this cage for quite a long time, at least a decade, I think you say in your book.
It's longer, yeah.
Longer. And then there's the post-separation, different cage now with some different rules. Did your children have any idea? Did they pick something up? Because, they were in there as well with you.
Yeah. Look, I mostly protected my children from knowing that. My most important thing was my children. That's my most important thing in my whole life is protecting my children. They weren't too aware of what was going on, especially post-separation. I really protected them. But just before everything kind of collapsed, they were really aware that things were not right in the house, and they kept asking him to get help. We all kept asking him to get help. They knew things weren't right. And then afterwards, it just, during the post-separation time, my daughter didn't want to see him. They were both getting a lot of, he was toxic. He just wasn't okay. And that's why they didn't want to see him. And eventually I had to get intervention orders so that they didn't have to see him. Of course, they knew what was going on. It was very unhealthy to be around him.
Yes. And did your friends, were there any friends or family members that also could see, even though we know no one ever really knows what happens behind closed doors, but you spend a lot of time with family and friends. Did anyone pick up something? Did anyone say anything?
Look, he was so charming. That's what narcissists do. They have great control over their behavior.
Okay.
So when we were with people, he was charming and wonderful, and everybody thought he was wonderful. And after the separation, he swung a beautiful story about how I was the villain who abandoned him in his hour of need, that he was, depressed and sad, and, how could I leave him? He had just attempted suicide and I'd left him. So there were a couple of friends. I wasn't very well for a while. I had some chronic illness issues, and he would come and visit me in hospital, and he was very mean often when he visited me. And one friend did say things to me, and of course I would make excuses for him. So sometimes you're not ready to hear it. Sometimes you're not ready to hear it. You also, it's a method of being protective of yourself. When you try and talk to them, and I'm talking about the perpetrator, when you talk to them, things escalate. So if you're trying to get an apology from them, if they've done something wrong and you try and get an apology, it escalates things.
Yes.
Their behavior gets worse and worse and worse. So a means of protecting yourself and your children is just to ignore the behavior and just keep things calm and safe in the house. Also, you're hoping things are going to get better. Maybe they'll get on medication, or they'll go and see a counsellor, and your relationship will get better. Maybe this is just a bad patch. I never saw it as abuse.
Yeah.
Until I was out of the relationship. I say in the book that I was in court one day and I looked down and there was we call it a power and abuse circle, wheel, power and abuse wheel. And I looked down in court and there was this power and abuse wheel, and I went through each of the different, they're like little pie pieces, and every single one related to me.
Gosh, what a show. And it's actually in the book, because one of the things I wanted to ask you about is there might be people listening or watching this interview who may be starting to have questions. Could they be in a situation like yours? What should they look for? And also, if there are family and friends that suspect something is going on, is there anything in particular that you wish somebody might have said or done for you at that time?
Yeah. I think there's three things that we have to look at for ourselves. So if it's ourselves, one is, what is my gut telling me? And if your gut is telling you this is not right, it's probably not right. The second is my values. What are my deep down values and how do I want to live my life? And the third is my nervous system. And your nervous system tells you what's going on. Is this person safe or not safe? And I think that's for all of us. If someone suspects things are not right in their relationship, they're probably not right.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do?
Yeah.
The first thing is to go and talk to someone who knows. So I wouldn't be talking to a friend. I would be talking to someone who knows. I would go and talk to a counselor. If you're at work, you might have an EAP. I wouldn't go and talk to a friend because often they don't know and they don't know the right things to say. So I would go and talk to someone, who's got some information. Call up one of the resources that we've got listed that you're going to list.
Yeah.
1-800-RESPECT, Jewish Care, a social worker. Talk to someone who can give you the right advice, and also start planning, because if you can not just leave, and obviously if it's a crisis you have to just leave, but if you can plan, have access to money, things like that, if you can plan, that's the best thing. As a support person, as a friend, if you have suspicions, if you've seen something you don't think is right, the best thing that you can do is ask, how can I support you? Because, often people are very sensitive. And so to go in and tell someone what to do, they feel very disempowered. So you want to empower people. You want to give them resources. You want to tell them where they can get help. But you want to ask them what they need. And sometimes it's not easy just to leave. Sometimes it's not the safest thing to do just to leave. And just leaving is only the beginning. For me, those 8-9 years after I left were much harder than actually being in that house. It wasn't happy in the house, but it was very unsafe being outside of the house post-separation. So being a friend is being supportive, listening, acknowledging, and just being there and asking, how can I support you?
I think when I was reading this, one of the most practical and helpful things in the book was you've got a list at the end of lessons learned. And in there are things that people could be doing for others, or could be saying, what's helpful to say, what's not helpful to say. Because I think so many of us might suspect something but are too scared to go there because we don't want to make it worse, or maybe it will ruin a relationship, or we put our foot in it and, we just don't know. So I just thought that is a beautiful gift that you've given everyone, just such practical things. I think the flying monkeys concept, really all of us should be thinking, are we flying monkeys? And we haven't thought about it, or do we suspect some people we know maybe need to be heard a little bit louder as well? I think that was just so important and really so beautifully done as well. One of the things I did want to talk about before we finish up was the post-separation abuse, which you've talked about as being even harder. I think there's a lot of women who go into that post-separation situation where there is manipulation, there is vindictive behaviour, there is really nasty stuff, and I hear from a lot of women about get refusal and the refusal to be able to move on in the eyes of Jewish law. It happened to you too. What did you do? Have you got some ideas and some tips for people who might find themselves in the same situation?
Yeah, it was really difficult, and I'm not religious, but I didn't want to be chained. I wanted to have a real break from this man who had betrayed me in every way possible. I think that it is so important to support people going through a divorce and to understand how important a get is. One of the things I can suggest is getting in touch with Unchain My Heart. They were incredible. They did advise me how to go about getting. I actually had to go use legal means. It is seen as part of coercive control in Australian law. It's seen as a part of abuse. Coercive control is now legalized criminalized
Yes.
in some of the states in Australia, and I think it will become criminalized in more states. You know, again, you spoke about flying monkeys. I had a friend saying to me, why do you want to get? You're not, why is it important to you? Instead of asking why he won't give me a get.
Yes.
My shul, which we were both members of, he was more supportive to him than they were to me. My rabbi wouldn't really sit down and talk to him. He was swearing at the chief rabbi. He was disgusting. He had a very religious lawyer at one stage who was very unhelpful. Yeah. So it's just really interesting, the flying monkeys that are around. But I did have some incredible help. And because of that, I was able to get my get much quicker than a lot of people who for years and years and years sit without a get. And that's, mostly women, but there are men who don't have their get. It is, each step. I was literally in court for years and years. For it was like 8 years of being in court. He would just drag me back in and drag me out. So there is also a way that you can now do it as part of your marriage itself, is to sign that you will give each other a get.
Like a prenup?
Like part of a prenup.
Prenup, yes. Because I'd imagine also having a get, it's part of closure. It's part of getting rid of every bond, just completely severing every tie.
We all deserve to be happy. Yes. And as much as we go into marriage wanting to be together and wanting to be happy, if it doesn't work out, you want to just, both people deserve happiness.
Yes. Which brings me to the part of your book where you talk about healing, which is so important. And obviously you've been through the fires, you're out the other end, a little bit singed around the edges. But you're so strong, and just what you're doing, just talking to us and with this book, and I'm sure you'll talk to many more people down the track and teach them, and there's so much to learn from you. One of the things that I was wondering about is, with your healing journey, has there been any particular things that you found really helpful, or services that you found helpful?
Lots. I think that the most important thing is connection. The people that you meet. And I think the more authentic we are, the more we talk. I think we often grow up, especially some of the cultures we grow up in are very much about, keeping quiet. We're very much about holding our shame. Learning to talk and finding my voice. So being able to connect with people in an authentic way and share our stories has led me to meet the most beautiful people, and through those connections, healing. Meeting beautiful people and being able to heal that way. I've had amazing social workers and counselors along the way who've really helped me. Kinesiology, meditation, just being out in nature, my beautiful children, and just so many things. I've really just taken the time. I think time and working and writing and friends, just so much, and yeah, just journaling, lots of different things along the way to healing.
There's this beautiful analogy that you've got in the book about when you're on the path to healing, you could be a coffee bean, a carrot, or an egg. Can you explain that? Because I thought this was simple and genius.
Yeah, I think one of my most important things is that I want to live with an open heart, and I want to share this idea that it's important to just keep living with an open heart. Sometimes we experience trauma, and so we want to close off and protect ourselves, because that's kind of the instinct. Let's protect ourselves. And when we have a pot of boiling water on the stove, and we put an egg into it, it hardens. And some people are like that; they really harden. When we put a carrot in there, it kind of gets all soft and mushy. But when we put the coffee bean in, it opens up, and it lets the aromas out, and it just grows. And I think that's really what I'm hoping we can all be as coffee beans, even though it's difficult. I think we just need to live with open hearts and have grace and ease, and that's what I just wish for everyone.
Yeah, I thought that was just so beautiful. So I've been thinking about what you've said, and thinking about being the coffee bean. Look, I guess, is there any other words of wisdom or advice you'd like to impart on everyone before we finish up today?
I'm just grateful to be here, and thank you. I'm glad you read it. I'm glad it's got lots of marks.
So many marks.
And I hope people buy it for their friends. And I just want to help people who are going through it, people who are, moving into relationships, and, for friends who are witnessing it maybe happening to their friends.
Yeah. Look, thank you so much. You have been so articulate and and so helpful. And I know I've learned a lot. I'm sure everyone listening and watching this would have learned a lot. Whether it's how to be a better friend, whether it's to recognize something within your own life that doesn't feel right. Also, just the resources out there. And really, I so recommend this book. Even if you're not sure you're going through it, or you have a friend, or even if you're supporting others, there's so much that can be really helpful here, as well as all the resources, the things to do, things not to do. That was just fantastic, as well as your amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing.
So much.